So welcome everyone. I just wanted to briefly introduce myself a little bit. My name is Dana Gidge and I am the Senior HR Consultant here at RLB. And one of the benefits of being an HR consultant is I get to work with lots of different clients. Mainly some of the clients that I work for is not-for-profit organizations. And we thought today what we do in our coffee chat is to kind of have me come talk about some of the HR tactics and some of the things that we've been involved in with not-for-profits over the last, for me, last 7 years, but certainly in particular with regards to the last year going through COVID and some things like that. So some of the main things that I really wanted to touch on today in chatting with Murray and Odessa when we were planning this is, how can we make this kind of more interactive? And once I think Murray and Odessa kind of got really excited when I start telling them some of the stories, some of the case studies, things that we've been through and that I've been through, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't think about it that way." So Murray said, "Can we throw a few case studies in there?" And I said, "Sure, let's do that. Let's come up with some real stories of some of the things that we've helped not-for-profits with, and how we can kind of hopefully take away some of those best practices and learn from them." So hopefully you'll get a little bit more than just me speaking to you. You'll also get some practical examples of the things that we've worked on with clients as well. So without further ado, this is me. I've been at RLB for 7 years. It'll be 7 years this May. Seems like it's gone extremely fast. Absolutely love getting to know clients. And I will say that working for not-for-profits is probably one of my favorite things to do, simply because I find they have a great working culture. They really do stand up to a lot of the HR core values that I believe are exciting in an organization. And a lot of them do exemplify that really, really well. So that's important. What we're going to talk about this morning is HR compliance, because of course HR compliance is the baseline for everything that we do, no matter what time or what season we're talking about HR. But then I also want to talk about employee engagement and employee retention. We'll talk a little bit about during COVID, but we'll also talk about in general employee engagement and retention and how we can look at that, particularly with regards to not-for-profits and how that differs a little bit than for-profit organizations. So first of all, I want to talk about HR compliance. So certainly being in COVID, it's nothing new for us anymore. It seems like this entire year has been compliance. Either we're at a stay-at-home order or lockdown order, or there's all these different things that have been thrown at us in the last year. So that has, of course, affected the Employment Standards Act, and there's been some temporary changes in that, which I kind of just want to remind you of, because I'm sure you all dealt with this last March when we first a lot of this first rolled out. So the first one is kind of in the block here, talking about infectious disease emergency leave. That's something where if employees are off, then they are deemed to be on a job protected leave, not a temporary layoff anymore. And of course, with that, like any other leave, an employee that would be on a leave, there are certain things that we can't do. So we have to continue benefits. We have to, just like a maternity or a paternity leave, we have certain obligations when that employee returns to us. Also want to talk a little bit about the COVID plan. Of course, there's a template that you can get from the Ministry of Labor. Every even not-for-profit organization needs to have this COVID plan in place and have it ready in case there is a blitz and somebody comes in, Ministry of Labor comes into the organization and asks for this plan. Of course, there's always the screeners everyone has to do every day when they come into work, and the masks regulations in the workplace and what that looks like. Some of the newest things in COVID that we've kind of been talking about in some of the not-for-profits that I've been working for is the vaccination policy and the rollout of that. It's been challenging for some organizations. Some organizations that I work with are frontline workers, where we're dealing with PSWs, providing frontline care to clients. So you can imagine the vaccination policy in that scenario would be really, really important. Others, with regards to some charities and some others that may not have frontline work involved in them, vaccination policy may be something that you're going to look at down the road and what that looks like. But we're already getting a lot of questions on vaccination. We're already getting a lot of questions on, after I get my second one, what will happen in an organization. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I've got a little case study prepared on that. The second thing we'll look at is employee handbook and policy manual, and I've got a great analogy there for you, why it's so important, and how it can really, at the end of the day, save you in cases of the exact example I'm going to talk about is workplace violence and harassment, and how I actually had a client call me back and say, hey, Dana, you saved us. I know oftentimes I tell clients, get an employee handbook, and this is why, but they don't always see the purpose and reason behind it. But when they had an investigator in doing an investigation, they actually came back and said, hey, you know what, you really saved us on this, and this is why. So also want to talk a little bit about health, wellness, and safety. Of course, even though we're in COVID, even though maybe we're all working from home, we still have some considerations in that. And then also want to talk a little bit about recruitment compliance, performance reviews, and compensation, because all those things don't go away. Recruitment, I'll talk a little bit about that later, but what you can and cannot say in an interview, and I've had a real doozy of them lately. So I'll kind of allude to that when we get to that slide. So first, talking about HR compliance, there is, of course, that infectious disease emergency leave. It is providing a temporary change to the ESA. So what it is it's basically, it's new legislation that provides them with a job protected leave. So if an employee has to go on because of childcare, maybe the schools are closed like we're doing right now, right? And all of a sudden they need to take time off. I know we've had several in our organization, another not-for-profit I worked with just yesterday, we had 4 people go off because of the new regulations. So whether it's childcare or actually it was another one that had a case in their family of COVID. So now that affects them, they're not able to come to work. So all of these would be job protected leaves for those employees. So certainly when we talk about recruitment and numbers in our organization, it means our numbers are all over the place, right? Because what we didn't think we would lose 4 people last week, all of a sudden now we're down 4 people, and our people resources are now being cut slimmer and slimmer. So this was this leave is actually still in place until July 3rd of 2021. And of course, it's been changed several times, several reiterations in order to, as this pandemic continues, and we're now into our 3rd semi-lockdown, if you want to call it. Now, employers do not have to pay this leave, but they have to give the employees the time off with a job protection when they come back. Okay. However, there are many Service Canada, Service Ontario, as many programs where they can get apply for EI benefits, and they can hopefully get covered for some payment for that time off. This is certainly common for childcare, family responsibility leave if they have ailing parents. There's also, if you're working in some not-for-profits, especially long-term care workers, there's also a regulation in place that says they cannot work at 2 locations, or they can't not work at 2 employers at the same time, just to control the spread in long-term care centers or at other client care places as well. So that really takes a big chunk of your workforce, because all of a sudden some of these people were doing a little bit of work here and a little bit of work there to kind of make up a full 40 hours a week. And now all of a sudden they're restricted to only 1 employer. So you really got to look at that. So March 1st, 2020 to July 3rd, 2021, it is a non-unionized employee whose employer has temporarily reduced or eliminate their hours of work for reasons related to COVID is deemed to be on a job protected leave. So there's 2 things. You can be deemed to be on a leave, or you can ask to be put on a leave. So an employee can come and say, I have to take care of children. I can be put on this leave. I want to be put on this leave. Or if you're an employer and you've had to decrease the number of hours that an employee works because you just don't have the work for them, or temporarily decrease their pay, then they would also then be deemed on a leave. So they have certain protections under the Act for that as well. So some other areas of compliance, certainly this has termination implications. I will tell you now, during the last year, every termination that I've done with a client, and there's been quite a few, if they've been on leave and we are looking at terminating them, then that has been a discussion with the lawyer and with the employee, in the fact that there could be higher termination expectations and severance payouts because they are on a job protected leave, and now all of a sudden we're letting them go within the organization. Similar as what you would have if somebody was on a maternity leave and you decided to terminate them in the middle of that leave. So there are termination implications there. Also, what we're seeing is that during the COVID period, there's questions on whether or not a person would get rehired right away. So that has implications as well. But this also brings into constructive dismissal. So if you remember, prior to COVID, constructive dismissal means that you can only change the major terms of an employment agreement to a certain level. There's no real stated level, but usually what happens if you change the wages of an employee or their regular working hours, then that employee can claim what we call constructive dismissal. What this leave has done, it is actually put an estoppel to constructive dismissal during this period. It doesn't mean it's a free for all for employers. What it means is that the employee can't come back because you are saying we have less work now because of COVID. We need to maybe only give you half hours instead of full hours. It doesn't mean that they have full reign for everything. It is a very temporary restriction that they can put in place without the risk of the employee coming back and saying, you've constructively dismissed me. I have no other choice. I leave my job. So that's kind of where they've put that estoppel into place for that period of time. The key thing you want to take away from that is that changing any major terms of an employment agreement is temporary only. It is not permanent. And if it's seen to be permanent, then certainly you can guarantee that it will probably go through the system and be looked at as a constructive dismissal claim. Other things I want to look at is a COVID plan. If you don't have one in place, please go ahead. There's one free through the Ministry of Labor. You can download the template. It is mandatory for all organizations to have this, even not-for-profits as well. And it's very important. I know a couple of my clients that I work with on a regular basis in NPO, a couple of them have already had blitzes come in. So if you haven't had one, I wouldn't say you're off the radar. I'd say that your turn is probably coming. So make sure you've got yourself prepared with that plan. If you don't have it, feel free to email me at the end. I can give you the template, and it's pretty simple. It's pretty much all the stuff you're doing already. It just needs to be documented. So what I've also been seeing in a couple, actually two of the not-for-profits that I've worked with, they both had work refusals due to COVID and what they felt was an unsafe work environment. Ministry of Labor has been brought in. What I will tell you is my experience with Ministry of Labor and work refusals during COVID is that Ministry of Labor is not taking well when employees willy-nilly call Ministry of Labor and say that their workplace is not protecting them. It has to be really big for them to come in. When they come in, if they see it's not something that's justified, then they will give a harsh warning to that employee. Obviously, there are, I'm sure, organizations that maybe are not following the reasons, and employees have a right to call in. And in those cases, it's warranted. But certainly, if you have all your plans in place, you have your COVID plan, employees are aware of it, you have your screeners, your mask, all those, your regular postings, then the Ministry of Labor doesn't take kindly to coming in and just for willy-nilly things like that. So that's been my experiences, and I've had two work refusals for unsafe work in NPOs in the last year. So it has been happening for sure. So COVID screening, still really, really important. We're at the last leg of it. Don't let it falter. Whether you do this electronically or paper, you need to do that. And mask orders as well. Even though some of our population has been vaccinated, we still have to keep the mask order. There's nothing telling us otherwise. So we have to keep that into place. And vaccination considerations. So I think after this is I'm just going to go back one. Oh, let me go back here. Vaccination considerations. We've had in 2 incidences with not-for-profits roll out a vaccination policy. So you're going to say, Dana, well, that don't really affect my organization. We're not frontline staff. Maybe you're a charity. Maybe you're some other type of not-for-profit. But what I say is keep it on your radar, because it's not maybe right now important for you, but it may be once we get everything coming back. Is what is your vaccination policy? Do they have to be vaccinated in order to return to the office? If they're not vaccinated, what are the options for that employee? Do they continue to work from home? Do they have, do you move them to another position? What does that look like? So it's I will tell you that all the vaccination policies that I've done so far, especially with not-for-profits, is the guidance that we've been given through best practices and through talking with lawyers is that we don't make it mandatory. You can, as an employer, make it mandatory, but I don't think there's many out there that will make it mandatory, for the simple fact that there's human rights considerations and things like that. But if they don't, then there may be some different things that they have to do compared to people that are vaccinated when they do return, if they're outside of the workplace right now. So those are certainly some considerations that you want to have. So you want to have that in a stated policy, and you want to have employees review it and sign off on it if you can. Okay. So employee handbook policy manual. So I will tell you that the policy, employee handbook or policy manual, whatever you want to call it, whatever your term or terms are for that requirement is basically, it is a basis for every organization, whether you're not for profit or you are for profit. It really is, I guess, if you want to call it, the fundamental policies that guide your organization. And they, of course, ESA is the bare minimum of everything, but then your policies kind of go with that as well. You can't go less than ESA, but you certainly can put the parameters around how things are monitored, such as vacation, fit for work. You know, there's certain things that you have to have, certainly your workplace violence and harassment, your fit for work policies, making sure that would be like your drug and alcohol policy, AODA, health and safety, progressive discipline, all those things. And it's kind of like an analogy. If you've ever worked with an IT person and you've called them and said, I need help. Like, my computer is going crazy. What's going on? The first thing that IT person is going to say to you is, have you turned your computer on and off? Right? Guaranteed every time. We actually have it as a slogan in our IT department at RLB. So the first thing they're going to say is, have you turned it on and off? In my experience in HR, and the 20 plus years that I've been involved in HR, is every time that things get sticky, whether an incident occurs, behavior is not going where we want it to go, or we have to instigate an investigation, the first thing when we call a lawyer, the lawyer is going to say to you is, have you checked, what's your policy on this? What's your policy manual? What does it say? And can you show me the policy? And can you show me that this employee read that policy and that they agreed to it? So your policy manual is the backbone, very much like turning it on and off on your computer. So you want to make sure you have one in place. And you may say, oh, I'm only a little tiny organization. I would say if you're getting to the 10-person mark, you're probably going to want something in writing. There are certain requirements, certainly with regards to violence and harassment. I think that has to be 5 people in your organization when you're required to have one. But I kind of want to give you the case example that we looked at just a couple of weeks ago. I was driving home from work and I had a client call me and he said, Dana, I just want to let you know, he said, and thank you for the work that you did for us on our employee handbook. He said, we had, and I was kind of coaching him on this incident as well, where they had an employee, 2 employees, one was an older employee, one was a younger employee, and there was a conflict there. And the employee, the older employee was saying that the organization was creating a hostile work environment for them, having her work with this younger employee who they didn't get along with. So actually what happened is they put the incident in and they wanted a third party to come in and review it. So they did have a third party come in and assess the situation, which is what the employee is allowed to do, by the way. And when the independent party came in, first thing they looked at was their policy manual. And in that policy manual, it talked about workplace violence and harassment. And one of the key things is that in order to be considered harassment, it has to be repetitive. Like, you can't just say, I don't like the color of Mary's hair, but if I come in every day and I say it and it's repetitive and it's something that's really going to hurt Mary, then it's more of harassment than something I'm going to say one day. So actually, they literally won, I guess, the inspection for the simple fact that they had a policy in place. It was clearly stated. The employee had reviewed it, but yet the employee's behavior was not being followed as per the policy. So it was really great that they had it. And he called me and said, hey, oftentimes I tell them they need this, but it's great when the client comes back and says, hey, it actually saved our butt in this situation, and we're glad that we had it. Thank you so much. So I always encourage you, if you don't have it, to do that as well. So I'm going to give you an example, and this is one of the examples that I gave to Murray for compliance in HR. So it's a resignation example. So it's actually a not-for-profit organization that I work with on a regular basis, and we had there's always the black and white of HR. The first thing is the employee put in a resignation, and the executive director called me right away and said, this person put their resignation in. And of course you would think, oh yeah, it's a resignation. You got a gift. All of a sudden, maybe this is a difficult employee. And you're kind of take resignations as a gift for the simple fact that you're not required to pay out severance. There's no termination pay. It's kind of a freebie, right? That they put their resignation in. So what happened is that was the black and white of the situation. The gray of the situation is this employee had actually been on leave. So now we're getting into the gray. So this employee was on leave. It was a medical leave, and they'd been on leave for over a year. However, even though this employee was on leave, they had applied for long-term disability and they did not get accepted for long-term disability. So they were actually off without any substantiated medical. And what we were doing is, and I think what kind of issued this resignation is we had been urging this employee who'd been off over a year now with no medical validation why they should be off because they were not approved by LTD. They went through that process and it didn't work. And every time we asked for medical, it was hard getting medical from them. And I will tell you, another caveat to this story is this person was off on a medical leave due to some type of mental capacity. So whether that be stress, anxiety, things like that. So obviously right away, our thought is this person of sound mind to give this resignation? And so the first thing that we said is we went back to, and one of the things that we were doing is asking this employee to continue paying their benefits portion, because when they're off, they still need to pay and keep up their benefits entitlement because it was a copay. So we didn't want it to look like that we were bugging this employee for benefits. They didn't have the money to pay it, and then they just decided to resign. And then it could come back and bite us because they're going to saying that she was forced to resign when she really didn't have to. So instead of taking the resignation, which is kind of what you would think we would do, is we actually asked the employee to go and consider it for another week. Don't worry about your benefits. We'll take care of that. Just let us know in a week if you're still ready, because we want you to think through this thoroughly. It was a long-term employee up to this point, and so there could have had some significant ramifications for us. And the employee did go away. They did come back, and they did still resign, in which case we did a formal letter acknowledging the resignation so that we could then close that concern. Oftentimes what will happen is people will give a resignation and they will not follow up that they accept that resignation. So whether that be in a letter or an email, I would always say, make sure you do something in writing that you accept that resignation, because then it's like a contract. I'm offering you this, you got to close it with I'm accepting it. And then that resignation, if it did go sour and something happened, they said, well, you know what, I really didn't mean that for that to be a resignation. Well, no, you put it in, we accepted it, and now we're past that date. So even something as simple as a resignation sometimes can certainly get more complicated. So moving on to health, wellness, and safety. Of course, we must continue to be compliant, even though we're in the middle of COVID. We can't slack on anything else. Wellness has probably been the number one factor in health and safety over the last year. Certainly, if you have an employee or family assistance plan, I would offer that to employees. Let them know that it's there, and make sure that your communication with your employees are consistent now more than ever before. So whether you've got a communications plan in place, what that looks like. Do you do it through newsletters? Do you have regular employee meetings? What does that look like? I'm sure there was all communication that went out to employees now that we've gone into this third lockdown, and what that looks like. So certainly the wellness of employees is a big concern, and we want to continue that. Our monthly workplace inspections, those all continue. We still have to do those. If you're not in the workplace and nobody's in the workplace, then you won't have to. But certainly I would look at making sure that their workplace and home arrangement is a safe work environment for them to work in as well. First aid renewals have been pushed off till the end of the year now. What's happening is there are still some first aid organizations that are still renewing during this period of time. And we've had actually a couple not-for-profits send employees off and they have been renewed. But if for some reason you can't get them renewed, that renewal will go on to the end of December. So they've kind of pushed it out a little bit more. I think it was till the end of June and they just pushed it till the end of December. So But like I said, St. John's and a few of these other ones have been doing some in-person with safety protocols in place. Consider ergonomics if your employees are working from home, for sure. What I've seen in most of the organizations that I've worked in is that there's kind of a blend. There's a few people in the office, or people that come in on a hybrid basis, where maybe, like for example, the ED in one of the ones that I work for comes in like Tuesday, Thursdays, but then working from home. Then someone comes in Monday, Wednesday, Friday to kind of man the office for deliveries and things like that. But for the most part, they're all working from home. So certainly there's ergonomics considerations. We again, another not-for-profit, we had an employee who was sitting at their dining room table. This has now gone into a year. They were having some ergonomics concerns, so we asked them that they could come into the office, grab their chair, and bring that home with them for this period and this duration, so that they can, make sure that ergonomics at home was a lot better. And we sent them a little presentation to make sure that they were set up properly. So again, work refusals regarding COVID and unsafe workplaces. I kind of alluded to that earlier. We have been having them. It was more so in the beginning of COVID, I would say, than on the tail end of COVID right now. But employees still do have a right to be able to refuse unsafe work due to if they feel the COVID protocols are not being followed. I would always say to keep pushing that the make sure that they are being followed, that they're in place, and that way you avoid a refusal. And follow your COVID plans, stay diligent. Right now, it's really easy for people to have their mask halfway down and their nose exposed, or, oh, I'm just going to the bathroom, I'm going to run and not use my mask. So you really want to make sure you keep diligent on those requirements. And again, we talk about the vaccination policy. So moving on to recruitment there for a little bit, know what you can ask. And I'm going to tell you now that probably my worst nightmare over COVID was being with an employer. And actually, this was not a not-for-profit. This was a for-profit organization that we were doing a full-fledged recruitment for. And we were in the final round of interviews. And the owner of the organization said to the candidate, and I'm sure he saw me go beet red, he said, so what's your view on COVID? He said, from 1 to 10, are you afraid to leave the house because of COVID, or do you feel that this is just all government conspiracy? And I'm like, oh my gosh, so there's no bearing on the job that this person's going to do. And all of a sudden the owner is asking this person their views on COVID. And I said to the candidate, you don't have to answer that. And then the owner followed up with, so when we have vaccinations, are you planning on being vaccinated? And of course, again, that has no bearing on the job or the duties and responsibilities of that role. And I nearly died in that interview. So know what you can ask. You can't ask those questions. Those are protected grounds. And you can deal with those once they're in the organization. What you can ask is, this job is required you to be in the office. Is there any reason why you feel you cannot attend to the office at this point in time? Okay, that's a much better way to do it, and ask questions around better ways to ask them than, what's your feelings on COVID and what does that look like? So all I'm saying is just make sure you keep to the script. You should make sure that you ask the same questions to all candidates, and that you don't have anything that could actually trip you up for those reasons. So other things for performance and compensation and recruitment is certainly, I know I deal with a lot of personal support workers and not in a not-for-profit organization, and you must certainly consider, some of them have restrictions of single employer right now, where they've actually lost a significant amount of people because they've gone to other organizations as their primary employer. And they're really struggling to find new hires in this marketplace, even though there's new programs out there trying to train new PSWs. These are really green employees that are coming in, so it's really hard for them. So recruitment has been hard in that particular world. I will tell you there's other areas of recruitment that's been doing extremely well right now. So performance reviews should still go ahead with some considerations. So some of the work that we do is we're still doing performance reviews. However, what I'm finding is there's going to be some margin of error for COVID. So every performance review that I've been a part of with different clients during this period is we've always asked questions on that performance appraisal is, how are you doing during COVID? What are you struggling with and how can we help you? And those are things that just opens that conversation that, okay, maybe this year hasn't been stellar, what can we do to help you? On the other side, when you look at compensation, is you really want to look at, especially if you're tying performance and compensation together, is are there freezes this year? If there's is there no increases, or is there some variation of an increase? And if so, what does that look like? And is there going to be a COVID bonus or something along those lines? And you're saying, Dana, what is a COVID bonus? So maybe there's people during COVID that have really stood out to you as being awesome, and they really stood up to the challenge, and they've actually exemplified their work performance during COVID. And it may not be everyone, but it may be certain particular people, in which case you really want to reward them for going above and beyond and rising above this really difficult situation. So it's actually a way to, I think, engage employees and to actually make them feel like they're valued in the organization on a period that really others have struggled, but they've really gone above and beyond. So that's important to look at. And rewarding those will certainly give you more long-term longevity with that employee going forward. And we're in the last hours, hopefully. We're in the last hours of COVID, who knows? But hopefully that will kind of get them through that next period that they need. So employee engagement. So not-for-profit, some things you really want to look at for employee engagement is really when you see employees, and you'll see this for sure, usually it'll take a year or 2 years before they get ready to leave the organization, or they're thinking about leaving, is it really means that that employee is suddenly getting less productive. They have more of a bad attitude than they did before, and they really have a lessened approach to their work. And what I want to kind of put that to is the rotten apple analogy, which I kind of look at. And, you can have a bowl of apples on your counter for a day. Maybe you've got groceries, you put them out there, you're trying to encourage the kids to eat more apples and you to eat more apples, so you have them out in plain sight. All of a sudden, Tuesday comes and you realize one of the apples have a little bit of a rotten spot on them. And you're like, oh no, I'm going to take that apple out. But you know what? We're busy. We got to go to work. We're doing all this stuff. So Wednesday, Thursday comes. All of a sudden now there's more of a brown spot. And by Friday, all of a sudden the next apple that's to it has a brown spot on it. So what's happening is that poor attitude of that other person is actually being viewed, and it's actually been taken on by that other coworker, because what they're doing is they're now disengaging that other employee because they've been keeping around for so long. And I think if you think back, you've probably all had instances where that has happened. So what you want to do is you want to create a really strong and healthy work environment where you actually look at employees and have conversations when you realize they're being less productive, when their attitude is starting to get worse, and have those conversations and kind of get it at the beginning stages where you want to build trust with that employee and ask them, what's going on? Why is this? Is this because you feel you're not being valued in the organization? Is it a pay thing? Do you feel you're not being paid? All those things have a conversation and a place and a time. So you really want to build trust, and you want to be able to show the employee that, keep your eyes on the future, that there is opportunities here for you, and what that might look like for them. So one of the studies I looked at, it said employees want to work for an organization whose mission they believe in and where they feel the work they do directly contributes to advancing the organization's mission. Employers need to focus on strategies to create meaningful work for their employees. And I want you to take away from this is basically that engagement and mission attachment are directly related. And that is never more consistent than in not-for-profit organizations. People go to not-for-profits because they are connected to the mission. They're connected to the cause, whether that be a charity, whether that be client care, if they're working with clients. That is the main reason why they work there. What you will see traditionally is that the pay in not-for-profits are probably not as high as in for-profit organizations, but what it makes up for is the passion and the emotional involvement in the mission of the organization. So certainly be deliberate about your engagement. Sometimes it doesn't happen overnight, and you have to be very deliberate and calculated with it. So make sure you assign meaningful work that's a link to the mission. If they understand what they're doing every day and how that works to the mission overall, then you'll get more buy-in. So align the employee and the NPO goals. What is their mission and why are they working for you? Develop a positive working relationship with the direct supervisor. right? If there's not a cohesive working relationship, they're not going to stay. One of the main reasons an employee leaves an organization, certainly it can be pay, it can be other things, but one of the main reasons is because they're not happy with their supervisor, and employees will leave for that reason. So make sure you develop that relationship. Make sure it's a mentor type relationship where they can also be really good with one another, and also where they know that that person has their back, right? Where it's a safe environment to come with if they have concerns or suggestions. The other thing which is really important in NPO when we're working there is watch for emotional engagement burnout. So you're going to be so connected with the mission and that sometimes that emotional connection will actually cause burnout, because you feel like either you're not getting ahead in that mission, or that becomes overwhelming, and emotionally it becomes really hard for them to keep up with that. So you want to really enable and empower employees. One of the other things that when I was doing some research is they talked about authority, is they feel that maybe they don't have the authority to do the work that they should be doing, or they don't have the tools or the technology or the documentation needed to do that. So you have to be able to empower employees. I'm not saying give them the authority to make all the decisions in the organization, but certainly you want to provide communication and autonomy in certain decision makings that fall within the scope of their job duties and their role of responsibilities. And so that means, not as much micromanaging, giving them the authority to have some autonomy in decision making, so they feel that they are empowered to do that work. And if you need to, provide operating procedures and give them opportunities for professional development. Maybe they want to look at advancing in the organization and what that can look like for them, or maybe it's a way they can just improve their role, and so that they have the tools that they need to grow and to support that role better. So certainly you want to facilitate deeper involvement. Some of the things that I've seen through some of the organizations I've worked with certainly has been employees involving them in decision making. Also, one of the ways we did it, so in the vaccination rollout, one of the things that we did is we actually in our newsletter put out for all employees to comment on vaccinations. One question was if they thought they would get the vaccination. Again, it was all confidential. And then we gave them some other parameters of the policy that they didn't realize was the policy, and we asked for their buy-in on it. And we did that through a survey, through our newsletter that was linked there. Also, you want to bring it to your Joint Health and Safety Committee. If you don't have a Joint Health and Safety Committee and aren't big enough for one, should have a safety rep, so get that safety rep involved. Also, suggestion boxes if you don't want to do it online, and really an open door policy. Ask them to come forward to get involved in that. And allow for feedback. Not every feedback are you going to actually implement and go along with, but certainly allowing for feedback produces an environment where employees feel like they have a deeper involvement in what's been going on in that organization. So certainly celebrate all the suggestions that are given. Look at employees' efforts and their initiatives that they're putting forward. And one of the really cool ways that a not-for-profit's doing this, again, it's one of the PSW companies that I work for, is the vaccination testimonials. So they rolled out their vaccination plan. The majority of their PSWs and frontline workers are now gotten their first round of vaccinations. And what they did is they actually put a newsletter link up where employees could post their photos of their vaccination. So what you'll see is employees volunteering to put their picture up with their being jabbed by a needle, or in that big screen that you can stand up after, or holding their vaccination cards saying that they've been vaccinated. And what that does is it really shows a positive light into what they're trying to roll out, is encourage vaccinations. And the employees are doing that for them. They want to do it. They want to post them, and we're not forcing them to do it. So it really has a big statement when employees go and they see their friends, or they see someone at a supervisory level, maybe over them, getting this vaccine and being so proud of that they're doing this. And it really encourages other people to buy into that policy as well. So certainly you want to review your compensation and benefits. That's always important. If anyone tells you that they're not motivated by money, I think it's a lie, because I think we all have things that we need to do, whether it's a mortgage or kids to put through university, or some people have student loans they have to pay off. So at certain periods in life, money is going to be a motivator, whether we like it or not. But some of the things in not-for-profits, when you are held where you sometimes cannot increase that amount is you want to look at benefits and what are some of the key motivators and benefits that you can get to make sure that you maintain that engagement. So consider amount of vacation you can give. Maybe you give a bit more vacation than you would normally give. What I also have seen is a lot of sick days, paid sick days for sure, or personal days, or other rewards such as gift cards, expensing a meal, or again, the newsletter involvement, or really different ways you can combat COVID fatigue. One of the other organizations right now just gave out sweatshirts to their employees with the organization name and a few things on, just as a little pick me up during COVID, and know that they've really been working really hard and that COVID fatigue is setting in for them and they wanted to reward their employees. So those are all considerations that you can give. Also, flexible working arrangements. I'm sure this has all been happening over the last year. What we want to look at is maybe what does this look like long term for us? And I'm sure you've probably already had the questions is, can I stay at home long term? Can I not? What does that look like? My advice would probably be to right now take it as it is, stay on that temporary arrangement until we know different, and then go from there. Unless your organization is making some permanent plans now, then you would want to look at that as well. So the vacation policy, I really wanted to go through this one because it was, to me, it was done very, very well. And it wasn't because I was involved. It was more because of the organization that I was working with and the executive director there. One thing that I really value with her is that she actually gets the team involved. So there's a team of supervisors and there's a team of the employees, obviously, and then there's myself as well. So one of the things about the vaccination policy is she got all the team involved in a special group so that we could discuss vaccination policy and to roll it out properly. So first of all, we went and we got best practices through the public health units. We looked at those. We got some lawyer information that we went and put into it. And we also had our supervisors involved so that they were well involved in the policy. And we had several reiterations, and we also took the feedback from the newsletters and we got all of that back. And it was only then after we got all of that done that we got our policy written, and then we got it rolled out. Another key thing that you need to look at this one is we had a union involved in it. So we had to also kind of work with the union president to make sure that, hey, this is the heads up on what's going on and how we can roll out that policy. So to me, that was a great example of working together as a team, to getting people involved, getting people's buy-in, and to really making them have a part in the decision making for this policy that was going to affect them. So it worked out really, really well. Of course, there's always bumps in the road when you always put new policies in place, but having the buy-in of all those parties and rolling it out really, really helped us. So that was something that really, really was benefit for us. So now I want to talk a little bit about employee retention and how to retain employees. If you've ever gone through a recruitment process, you know that that's been expensive, it's timely. Then you get a new employee on board. Sometimes they're green, you have to do a lot of training. Sometimes they don't work out, they're just not a culture fit or other things like that. So how do we kind of grow and maintain the people that we have so we can retain them? One of the things that you really want to do is communicate the mission and strategy and refer back to it often. I always like to refer back to the strategy and the mission, simply because, again, in not-for-profit, employees are tied to that, right? They have that engagement with the mission and the strategy. So the more you can communicate back to that and why we're doing something, the more they'll be retained and more they'll want to work for you. Certainly hire for your culture. If you feel that someone may have really strong skills, but they're not a culture fit, then that's not going to work out, because you can train somebody on skill and ability, but you can't make them fit a culture. So that's something that oftentimes you find out too far down the road. So what I would suggest is when you're doing your recruiting is you have a couple culture fit questions put in there so that you can assess that. Also, you want to continually discuss and reinforce the mission statement and core values, what that looks like. So one of the things that we do at RLB is we actually, we used to do rewards for exemplifying core values. So maybe that can be something that you can do. It doesn't have to be a great, huge program. It can be something that you can really just give it out here and there. Also provide professional and career development. People don't want to stay stagnant in their jobs and their roles. Very few people do. They get bored and they want to move on. So what you want to do is provide professional and career development to those people so that they understand that either they can make their role really, really great, or there's some career development there for them. And we know some of these, not-for-profits are really small, so there's not a lot of openings in career development, but how do you make their job the best that it can well be? And then, of course, that helps you better to develop internal talent. So provide recognition awards. What I've seen, most organizations do that. But again, provide recognition and rewards and relate it back to your mission and your vision. And create specific performance standards for each position. Often what I find is people that do not have specific performance standards dictated for their role, then they don't understand what they're doing in that role. So having specific standards is really important, because then they can gauge themselves on how well they're doing. Also, you want to recognize signs of disengagement, which we talked about before, and acknowledge the skill and ability of emotional work. Some of the work that not-for-profits do is very emotional, and you want to make sure that that burnout is not happening. So resetting the baseline. One of the things that we did with a not-for-profit recently is we had a group of supervisors, and that group of supervisors were made up of some long-term supervisors. One employee had been actually promoted from more of the general consensus up to a supervisor. And what happened is they were actually, the entire group were actually exhibiting behavior that was not acceptable for a supervisor level, meaning they were not taking the authority they should be and disciplining when they need it to be. And also some of the language and the behavior they were exhibiting just was not acceptable. It did not portray the organization in a good light, and they were not ambassadors of the organization. So what we did is we actually did a baseline resetting. So you're saying, what is a baseline resetting? What we did is we looked at all of the supervisors, and we knew that there were concerns with each of them. So first, what we wanted to do is reset the baseline for them. So that was a meeting that we got together with all the supervisors, and we said, listen, we know this is going on. We know there's concerns, but what we want to do is reset the baseline. So going forward, these are the expectations of this role. This is the authority that you're going to be given. This is how you're going to be an ambassador for the company. This is how this happen. And what I will tell you is it wasn't taken favorably first. When we had the meeting, it didn't go well. They all kind of resisted the fact that they felt that they were doing anything wrong. They felt that they were fine, and this meeting was not warranted. And we got a lot of really rough feedback in that meeting, that they didn't think that this meeting was necessary. What happened is, however, in the week that followed, and even in the day that followed, is employees came to us, and all of a sudden, or not employees, but the supervisors in that meeting came to us and said, you know what? I believe I wasn't the best example in this situation. I believe I said this and that did not exemplify the company. So once they went away from that meeting and they thought about what was said in that meeting, they actually realized, and they did some self-actualization, and they came back without us even forcing them to say, this is where I think I need to improve. So I will tell you, there were at least one or two disciplines out of the 3 or 4 supervisors that were there. But it was all taken well after the fact. So even though it was a really uncomfortable and a really courageous conversation to have with the group, in the end, it all did work out. And now we're just waiting to see if they're going to uphold their end of the agreement and bring that long-term attitude change and that proper behavior and conduct to their roles. So I guess we'll see in the next few months how long that lasts. So here's just some of the resources that we looked at for this presentation. That's kind of all I have. I know we've got a few minutes for questions if anyone has any.
Can you throw that resources slide up back one more time?
Yep.
Thank you.
So this is 2. One is 4 ways nonprofits can improve employee engagement. There's a great article there, but another one that I really liked and was much longer and much more information in was engaging the nonprofit workforce. If you want, Tim, I can send you those as well. The second one I would say is probably one of the better ones. It came up with some really great research in the area for not-for-profits.
That's great. Thank you.
I had a question, Dana.
Yep.
When you were talking about the emergency COVID leave, or I'm not exactly sure.
Infectious disease emergency leave, yep.
Yeah. What, like if you have employees that wish to have that leave, like what sorts of reasons do they have to get, or can they just request it? Like, how does that work?
They can request it. Certainly what they can do is they can go. So if you, there is an actual procedure online that they have to follow. So they have to provide, request it through the organization. There are reasons why they would qualify. So typically what the reasons we've seen is some of them will go on a medical leave during COVID, which can be totally different as well, but they're still deemed to be on a protected leave for medical accommodation. But if there's a family leave, so for example, now with the new legislation, we've had employees come to us saying, I can't do my job because my kids have no daycare and they have no work, no school, right? I have to be online for them. So then they're deemed to be on a job protected COVID leave.
So what if there's people who have like mental health issues related to COVID? Does that fall within
so they
that,
can, but that would, it can fall into that, but that would also be covered under medical accommodation. So whenever an employee, even outside of COVID, has a medical concern requiring them not be able to work, or they have to have a modified arrangement at work, then they're protected, right? And they're protected not necessarily through ESA, they're protected through the courts and the Superior Court that's made decisions in common law based on medical accommodation, where the employer has the obligation to provide accommodation to that employee.
Okay, thanks.
But we're seeing a lot. I will tell you, in the last year, out of all the clients that I work for, I would say almost every one of them have had some type of medical accommodation around stress and anxiety during COVID. It is not uncommon. What I will tell you is you need to manage it the same as if it was a physical accommodation. Ask for additional information from the doctor. Give them a functional abilities form for a non-work related injury. Ask them to fill it out. Keep on top of them so that when they have their regular appointments, if they can't come back to work, that they still fill out that form. And don't hassle them. And you don't have to be rude about it or anything like that, but you still need reasons why this person's off work. So handle it the same as if it was a back injury, same as if it was someone who had a slip and a fall. Because if not, you get caught in that catch 22, where the employee, you're adding more stress to them asking for medical. I hear that all the time. Like all of us, I have anxiety and depression, and just you asking for me to go to my doctor and get medical is causing me anxiety. Well, I'm sorry, you still have to provide that information to the employer.
Okay, thank you.
I had a follow-up vaccination question. We got a bunch of staff serving overseas, and we're anticipating that some of those countries will require a vaccine passport. Can you envision a time at which requiring a vaccine could become a bona fide occupational requirement?
It's funny that you say that, because one of the not-for-profits that I'm working with right now is we're looking at the phase 2 vaccination and what that looks like going forward, because you have to be proactive when you're making some of these vaccination policies. We've had some employees that say they cannot have it for religious reasons, for some other reasons. And then so if they can't have it, then there's going to be repercussions. Right? There has to be, because whether that be that they're come back and they're still required to wear PPE when maybe the people who are vaccinated do not. There may come to a point when that's going to happen, right? And it's not going to be comfortable for them, and it's not going to be comfortable for people coming forward. So I can see that, yes, there could be a requirement for that. I just don't know. That's why it's easier to roll out your own policy now to say, if you don't get the vaccination, then these are some options that may happen with you. You may have to go to another job where you're not as exposed. You may have to go take a job. You may have to take a job protected leave. That just may be what it comes down to. You can't work because you're not vaccinated, or one of those options, right? So right now, what we're looking at is that they have to remain PPE, even if the government said tomorrow, everybody that has their second dose of vaccination don't have to wear PPE, then those will, but the other people will probably still have remain in that workplace and wear their PPE. So it's not like they're going to be treated just like everyone else. There's going to come to a point where it's going to get uncomfortable, and we're going to see employees fighting back.
That's great. Thanks, Dana.
So these people are not back yet. They're still overseas.
That's correct. Yeah. And we've got some that are pretty strongly
Are they missionaries or stuff like that? Okay. Yeah. I can see that. Yep. So yeah, so you will have to come up probably with a policy down the road on what that looks like and going forward what it looks like. But if they're also working in the country that they're working in, I think there's going to be some obligation that they're going to have to follow those requirements, right?
Yeah, I agree.
They probably have to follow it now for certain reasons.
Yeah, lots of protocols and PPE in place. Just and some of them have access to vaccinations before we do, so that you know, if they're willing, that's great. But some certainly aren't. So.
Yeah, and we had to cross that bridge with this one particular not-for-profit. Is we first, I'll tell you, in the first reiteration, we made it mandatory, and we went to the lawyer, and the lawyer's like, "You don't want to make it mandatory. Let's put some repercussions in if they don't get the vaccination." And that's why I talk about: do they need to do another job? Do they have to continue to wear PPE? What is the ramifications if they don't get it?
That's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dana.
Yep.
Are employees required to present proof to employers that they've received a vaccination?
So again, this goes back to how you're going to word your policy. So what I can tell, and I've worked with several not-for-profits, it seems like not-for-profits are ahead of the game when it comes to vaccine rollout policies, just because the nature of some of them are dealing with clients and frontline workers. And all of them that I've seen have made it, sorry, what was your question again, Colleen? I lost my train of thought there.
Is it, do employees have to show proof?
Yes.
Like, because it's like a medical thing, is it not? Like,
yes. Okay, good. Exactly. So I remember now. So yes, we have to make sure that we have plans in place to protect the confidentiality of the medical information that's provided. So we have to have what is it called? Like the officer in place that makes sure that we collect that information. And there are requirements under the government for medical information, where you can store it, how you can store it, things like that. So you have to make sure you have that in place before you collect it. So in both scenarios that I work really closely with, we are requiring proof. That proof has to be either the email that they send back or the stamping of, I think they stamp something and give you a receipt once you go there. All of those have to be given to the employer as verification, but we also have to make sure that we're abiding by those privacy concerns for when we're gathering that information. If you do a quick Google search, you should be able to do it, because some employers also are asking for, we asked for health card numbers, and we had to make sure that we had all of our protocol in place to be able to maintain the privacy for the health card numbers. So yeah, you can ask for it, and it depends on how much you want. You can say specifically what you want and make it very tight, or you can say, I just need a picture of the confirmation, or something like that. From what I've seen, we've been asking for actual emails or the slip that they've been given at vaccination. We've had some people push back, but for the most part, they're willing to give that, no problem. And now, of course, we'll ask for the second one once that's done, right? But as you talked about, Colleen, some of these are going to be bona fide occupational requirements, I believe, down the road, because we're dealing with, some of them are PSW workers, and they're working in that area where it's going to really be critical if they don't have it. Anything else? Well, certainly, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Enjoy the day. I think, as we mentioned before, we're going to have some amazing weather. So try and get out there and walk lunchtime if we all can.